be subtle in getting it out. Got one. Look at that, right off the bat. Oh, they love this pattern.
Peter Charles here, Hooked Fly Fly Fishing. And if I look a little different, yeah, I've had the COVID-19 haircut. Finally. Anyway, this is my video on carp tactics. And I should mention before we get going that I predominantly fish for carp in rivers rather than lakes and ponds. I have caught them in lakes and ponds, but it's not my preference. I like to be able to get in the river, stalk them. You know, it's more like bone fishing. Golden bones, as they call them. Anyway, let's get into what I do to catch carp in rivers. And we can start with my gear. This is a G. Loomis 8-weight shore stalker. It's 8 foot 8 inches long. And I always equip it with a reel with some excellent drag. I mean, you've got to think in saltwater reel terms when you're talking carp because they can really run. And I've been taking on some really long runs with carp. So you need a good drag. This one's a Danielson 6.9, LW 6.9, and it has an excellent drag. And I use this in saltwater as well. So you don't cheap out on the reel. We can cheap out the reel with bass. We can cheap out with pike. We can cheap out with trout. Don't cheap out with carp. I actually had the experience of having a reel get so hot that I could barely turn it to retrieve. I was fishing for smallmouth and I hooked into like a 15-pound carp accidentally. Okay, the carp just sucked the fly in, and all of a sudden it was like I had that OMG moment. And after a few minutes of the fight, I could hardly turn the reel. It was so seized up. It was a cheap reel that I used with my fly fishing casting instruction classes, and so there, it's like a $50 reel. And I thought for bass, that's fine. I don't need to bring anything else. Whoopsies. So yeah, you need something with a good reel. Learned that one the hard way. So 8 weights are good, 7 weights are good. I also use the IMX Pro Streamer 7 weight as well. That works lovely. As far as lines are concerned, you're going to use almost always a floating line. I don't see any reason for sinking lines. I don't see any reason for even sink tips or poly leaders. Carp are in the shallows, and we're going to be casting relatively short ranges to them if you do a good job. Long range cast apart carp are usually less productive. So I'll talk about tactics in a moment, how to get close. But typically I'm going to use this Kelly Galoop streamer line by Airflow. I also have caught a lot of carp on the Airflow Exceed 8 weight. And also, interestingly, I also use the Airflow Switch Float in the 270 grain version. And I use this for carp as well because it loads quickly. So when I'm doing some really short range stuff, this one is handy. So as far as lines are concerned, a good floating line that can handle a weighted fly, work close, be able, and the thing about the rod here, the shore stalker rod, is it loads quickly, which is something else we want. We want to pick up line and get it back out there. You don't want to be false casting over carp. So it's like pick it up, poof, get it out there. One false cast at most. So that's what I'm looking at. Now for flies, I've got my twitch flies. I have a crayfish pattern that I use a lot. I've also done a lot of carp fishing with a rubber-legged squirrel tail nymph. Now, I will say one thing. You can use any fly you like as long as it's got rubber legs. I don't know what it is about rubber legs, but carp love rubber legs. So if you've got a fly with rubber legs, you've considerably improved your odds. Yeah, you can catch them on other flies, and I have. I've caught them on black leeches. I've caught them on olive woolly buggers. I've caught them on a variety of flies, but lordy, 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 if you have a fly with rubber legs, does it ever work? So all of these have got rubber legs. And trust me, I've caught plenty of carp on them. So, simple. Carp are bottom feeders. They're feeding on insects and crayfish. So does that sound familiar? Trout fishermen out there? Does it sound familiar? Insects? nymphs, crayfish. Anything's on the bottom, they'll eat. And so the whole trick is to get the fly on the bottom so it needs some weight. But you don't want to be snagging up every 30 seconds. So you're going to have to sort of tread a little carefully with the weighting on how well you do it. And that takes a bit of experience to know how your local water flows, what the flow rates are, what the depths are, what you need to get down, stay down, but not end up with dragging the bottom and pulling up a lot of weeds and snagging up all the time. So that's sort of a little juggling act you have to do, and a little bit of split shot in the leader might be required from time to time. Also, the other part of the weight issue is you don't want everything going schmack into the water because that spooks them. Something I have to mention about carp is they're probably one of the smartest freshwater fish out there. And I'll tell you, if it looks unnatural, they're not going to take it. Okay? So keep that in mind. We're not talking stupid fish here. Carp have a bad reputation, but it's not deserved. They're a clever fish, and they're hard to fool. And if you've got bad tactics or you're sloppy, you're not going to catch fish. Okay, so let's start. I've got my shore stalker. I've got my Kelly Galoop streamer line on it. I've got my crayfish pattern with a slight bit of weight on it. And I've got, let's say, 9-foot leader, tapered leader. Nothing special about the leader, as long as it's strong enough to hold onto a carp. It's got to be a minimum 10-pound test. Anything less than 10-pound test isn't going to work. So I put all this together, out I go. So I know there's a spot. Carp tend to congregate in the same areas all of the time. I know where there's a couple of spots that hold carp, so I'm looking for those spots. So do I go wading up and start fishing? No. You do that, you're just going to spook them. You don't want to act like a predator. Like I said, these are smart fish. So if you come at them like this, stalking, they're gone. What you have to do, this is sound kind of weird, but as I told you, they're smart fish. You have to act like you don't care about them. So I wade modestly close to them, and then I turn my back to them, and I start fishing the other way and start catching smallmouth. Because you know what? Smallmouth and carp take the same flies. So I don't care. I'll catch a few smallmouth. And I'll cast the opposite direction. And what's interesting, 1 or 2 carp will come out of the pod and come within maybe 10 to 15 feet of me, and we'll just hold. And I can see them out of my corner of my eye, and I don't look at them. I just might go like that, but that's about it. I don't really pay much attention to them. I keep fishing that way. And then I'll go back to the pod. You've just been declared part of the furniture. If they just swim back to the pod casually, you know what? They're going to ignore you from now on. You have been checked out. And now you can fish them. And that's it. We don't think of that kind of behavior in a fish, but it's happened to me over and over and over again. They come swimming out, they stop and they hold in the current. They're always a little bit downstream of you, and they'll eyeball you, and there may be 1, maybe 2, and they'll just sit there and eyeball you for about a minute, and then they just go back to the pod. And now you can fish them all day. I've hooked and landed 4 fish out of the same pod, and they went tearing all through the pod when I'm fighting them. And you know what? I landed them, go back, and the pod is just doing their thing. I went right back to fishing for them. 4 fish out of the same pod at close range. Okay, if you get declared part of the furniture, you can do that. They will ignore you after that. So you have to be really careful about not adopting predator behavior, because that's what they're looking for. If you're keyed in on them, checking them out, they're used to that. They know that behavior. They're gone. But once they get used to you, you can be there all day. No problem at all. So, how do you fish for carp? I would recommend, first and foremost, to sight fish for them. Yes, I have caught them blind fishing, but that's a low probability way of fishing for carp. What we're looking for is their feeding behavior, and they don't always require them to be feeding for us to catch them. It's not necessary. I've caught them under a variety of conditions, but most predictably is when they're feeding and they go nose down and they kick up a mud plume. And what you want to do is cast, if you're in a river, you're casting upstream and just beyond them, and then let the fly swing in front of their nose and then pull it through the mud plume. And we think of carp being lazy and slow and they won't chase. I got news for you. You do that with a crayfish pattern and they don't get it on the first try. If they go after it and miss it, they will chase it. And I've had them chase a crayfish pattern 10 or 15 feet before they got a hold of it. Once they turn on it, keep stripping. Keep that crayfish pattern moving, because crayfish flee. And that carp will come after it and inhale that thing. It's amazing to watch them do that. In fact, it's nerve-wracking when it's a big one and you see the big one just turn and start coming after your fly. I've also had an interesting experience. I had a pod that I was fishing to, and I was just using an ordinary unweighted olive woolly bugger. This is when I was starting to get into fishing for carp. And I botched the cast. I saw one mudding, and I cast that one, and I completely botched it, and the cast went goodness knows where. So I'm starting to strip back really fast to pick it up to get it back to that guy, and another carp came flying out of the pod and nailed the woolly bugger. Just like a bass. So don't think that they won't chase. Don't think that they won't be aggressive. If they're in the mood and they're comfortable with you and they are not nervous, oh yeah, they'll chase, they'll hit. You're going to have a lot of fun with them, as I say, but you have to get them used to your presence first before you start. So as far as how I present the fly, I'm in a river, relatively slow currents, but not frog water, but relatively slow. I always cast upstream of the fish and beyond them, so I can bring it across their nose. They're oriented downwards. They have a downward sloping mouth. Their eyes are looking down. So you cannot present a fly up here to a carp and expect the carp to take it. No. The best you can get out is eye level or lower. So your fly has to come through the mud plume down here. And then off it goes, out through the mud plume, and they're all after it. My biggest carp doing that, by the way, was close to 40 pounds. So that was an adventure. That was off of a boat in Lake Ontario. Now, that was an adventure. So you can catch them doing this. And the important thing, if I want to sum this up, is get the right tackle. Don't go undergunned. Make sure you've got a reel with a good drag. Floating line is fine. You need some weight on the flies. Rubber legs, rubber legs, rubber legs. Don't forget rubber legs. Okay. Cast upstream of them and bring it in front of their nose. Make sure that you don't go right at them. Pretend to ignore them. Pretend that they're not there. They're used to predators. So if you pretend they're not there, you know what? They're going to ignore you. Once you've got them to that state where they're ignoring you, have fun. You can fish to them all day. Also, I would suggest that be very careful with your casting. Learn to lay open loops, which drop the fly in, especially when you're working with a weighted fly. You don't want to go whap with a big splash. Learn to just lay it out. There's an old expression about tire tracking, which is where the line kind of rolls out onto the top of the water. Stuff like that. Really lazy casts. Don't run the line over their heads. Whether you're false casting or you're laying it on the water, don't put it on top of them. They're gone. They are spooky fish. They will not tolerate stuff that looks unnatural. So you have to cast them as if you're casting a dry fly to a trout. You have to be accurate, just like trout fishing. You have to make sure that you get that fly going across them at the right level, not up here, down here. And make sure that the fly is not moving too fast nor too slow when it goes by them. It has to look catchable. You know what I mean? If it's going, let's just ignore it. The last thing I'm going to say is we don't think this of carp, but they will take streamers and minnow patterns as well, if it looks injured. So if you do a halting sort of retrieve, let the thing roll, bit of retrieve, let it roll, retrieve, they'll come after that too. So they're opportunistic feeders. They will come after a lot of different prey, but they're not really aggressive feeders like a bass or a pike that will ambush something and go like hell to catch it. They're going to take their time. They're going to be they conserve their energy. They're smart fish. So if it's catchable, they'll go after it. If it looks too fast, bye. There's always another bug or another fish or another crayfish to eat. So keep that in mind. They're smart fish. You have to be careful. You have to not be aggressive, not go charging in after them. But you can get quite close to them and, take a lot of fish out of a single pod if you're willing to put the time and investment into pretending like you don't care about them. So there you go. That's how I catch river carp. I've caught tons of fish doing this. I've had a blast doing this. And it's quite doable. So don't let anybody tell you that you can't catch them, because you do it right, you can catch loads. Cheers.
Got one. Look at that, right off the bat. They love this bat.